They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? Well, a little twist on that proverb is that I would say Jesus can paint thousands of pictures with his words. Over 50 stories that Jesus tells, or what we maybe sometimes called parables. Parables are these awesome teaching techniques that Jesus had where he could just paint images in people's minds with his words. Over 50 of those stories are recorded for us in the Bible about the life of Jesus. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are kind of the biographies of Jesus. And over 50 stories are told there, and yet there is probably it's arguable, but the most popular parable and the one that gets painted the most by artists is the one we're going to have the opportunity to look at today. You maybe know it as the parable of the Prodigal Son. Prodigal is a word that just means extravagant, no holds barred. I'm going to do whatever I want. It can be good and can be bad, but in this case it was bad. But it's maybe also known as the parable of the lost son. Is maybe it's how it's also known, and maybe you know that story. But even if you know the story, I bet you don't remember all the details every time. It's 22 verses, and so we maybe lose some of the details. And so we're going to read it again today. Just walk through that parable of the prodigal son. But as we do it, I'm going to ask you to just really let Jesus paint the picture on the canvas of your mind. Try to visualize everything of how he depicts of this story, because that's how he does it. He has a group of people in front of him, and he is just telling a story with just vivid word pictures. So do yourself a favor and think that this is actually Jesus painting this picture in your mind. All right, so we'll read these words from Luke chapter 15 once again today. Luke chapter 15 is sometimes called the lost chapter of the Bible. It has 3 stories in a row that are all about being lost. You have a lost sheep, you have a lost coin, and then you get to this story which really talks about a lost son. And so reading from Luke chapter 15, Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate,' so he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. And so he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' And so he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And so they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. And so he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' So the older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could go celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. My son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So could you see it? Could you see those pictures in your mind? Could you maybe even hear the stomach growling of that son as he ran away and he's just longing to eat the pods that are being fed to the pigs? Could you maybe see him coming to his senses like, oh man, what am I doing? And then maybe could you hear him practicing that speech as he walked the whole way home? Okay, what am I going to say? All right, how about, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. Father, I have sinned against heaven. I mean, he must have practiced because he nailed it, right? It was the exact same words. Whatever he practiced, this is what I'm going to say. That's exactly what he said. Could you see? Could you see the Father peering down the path and seeing his son on the horizon? Could you see that same elderly man get up and start running? You know, what a picture, right? And sandals on his feet. And interestingly enough, culturally at that time, it was undignified for a man to run in public. But he did it. Could you see his tears, maybe meeting the corners of his smile? As he got nearer and nearer and nearer to that son and confirmed, yep, that's him. And he's ready to throw his arms around his neck. Could you see the robe being brought out to him and put on him? Or the ring? Could you hear the band playing? Could you see the dancing? Could you see the other brother kind of pouting as he sat there on the driveway, not wanting to go in? Could you see the face of the father, maybe from a different angle this time, as he's pleading with son number 2, or older son? I'm going to call him son number 2 throughout the sermon because he's the second one mentioned. But could you see the father pleading with him, come on in and celebrate? Could you hear Amazing Grace playing in the background of that scene? Not because we just sang it, but because it inspired the lyrics. What once was lost, now is found. It's quite the picture, isn't it? Where did you see yourself in that scene? Or where do you see yourself now? If you review that parabolic scene, that story scene in your mind, with whom do you identify? Do you see yourself as that reckless child, the one who's all about wild living, and maybe that's either is you or was you, and you just have that whole lifestyle, and yet maybe you also know what it was like that after your season of wild living, you found a parent or a friend or a community with open arms, ready to welcome you back. Is that you? Or maybe you're that son, that reckless son, but you're not quite at that stage of being welcomed back. Maybe right now you're rehearsing your apology. What am I going to say? I have sinned against heaven and against you. I have sinned against heaven. Just make me a servant. Or maybe you're the other son, the so-called obedient one, who you're just a little bit miffed because you've done all the right things in life and they get the party thrown for them. And you're doing all the responsible stuff in the community, but it seems like people who don't do anything, they get all the rewards. How fair is that? And you end up paying for it. I mean, that's really what happened here, right? The father had already divided the estate, so whose fattened calf really paid for the party? It was the older son's fattened calf. That was paying for his brother's party. Is that you? Do you really struggle when you see people being forgiven so easily? Being let back into the family when you've done all the hard work? That's not fair. Maybe you see yourself as the father. At various stages in life, maybe you're the father at a stage in life where your kid wants nothing to do with you. And you see him walking away. And you're wondering, man, do I chase after him and stop him? Or do I just let him go and pray that he comes to his senses and I'll be here with open arms? Or are you maybe the father a little bit later on who's just peering down the path? Is he coming? Is he coming? Is he coming? Or you're that father who's rejoicing already because some loved one has already come back and you can't contain your joy and you are just throwing parties all the time. Or maybe you're the father who's trying to settle two parties. Maybe your siblings are fighting, or your sons or your children are fighting, and you're caught in between. Maybe you don't see yourself as any of those top three characters. Maybe you see yourself somewhere in the background. Maybe you're just the robe getter, or you're the ring getter. That's where you see yourself. Or maybe you're the one queuing up the band, or maybe you're the one who's spilling the beans. You're the informant. Oh yeah, this is what's going on in there. What's your role? Where do you see yourself in Luke 15? There's a lot of choices. Let's narrow it down. Where do you see yourself? Who do you identify with when it comes just to the two brothers? Do you find yourself as the squanderer or the scholar? The prodigal or the pouter? The younger son or the older son? Neither is really an enviable position, right, to identify with. When you think about it, those two guys really describe what's wrong with the world. On the one hand, you have some people who just have no morals whatsoever. I'm just going to live the way I want, and they squander all the gifts that God has ever given to them, and no holds barred. And on the other end of the spectrum is the person who is maybe accused of being, or not just accused of being, but rightfully accused of being, so judgmental and so slow to forgive and not welcoming. Which one are you? Like I said, it really depicts what's wrong with the world. In fact, that was a survey in a newspaper over 100 years ago in England. The editor said, I want to hear your answers. And that's what he asked. What's wrong with the world? And everybody wrote in their answers, and they talked about all the people that are squandering one way, and the other one said, oh, it's all the people who are so judgmental. But there was one person who wrote in, last name by the name of Chesterton, not a big deal. But he wrote in, dear sirs, I am. I am. And truth be told, any one of us could have written that letter to the editor. At different stages of life, maybe simultaneously, but at sometimes we are guilty of just living the way we want, forget anything about morals, forget anything about what God says. At other times, we're like the older son, where we have a tough time forgiving people. One moment we're bowing down and we're pleading forgiveness for our mistakes. At the other moment, we have a hard time letting go of other people's mistakes. You know, we all could say that. What's wrong with the world? I am. And to truly come to grips with that reality, that can lead us to despair. I am wrong with this world. What's wrong with this world? And yet God does not want you to despair today. Because who does he want you to see in this parable? Not so much the two boys. He wants you to see the dad. He wants you to see the Father. The Father is actually mentioned more than the sons in this section. 13 times the name of the Father comes up, more than the sons. But it's not just how often his name shows up that makes him prominent here. What makes him prominent is really the size of his heart, isn't it? I mean, you just see this dad, and you're like, who could do this? You know, what kind of a dad is going to not write off a son who wishes him dead? What kind of a dad is not going to burn bridges, but just make sure that the door stays open and his arms stay open to receive this son who is doing who knows what, who knows where, but there's the dad. What kind of a dad is willing to throw a party for a son who has wasted all the money that his dad gave to him, and he's wasted it on wild living, on prostitutes? What kind of a dad is willing to do that? Well, you might say it's a prodigal dad. Not that he was wild in living, but he was wild with his forgiveness. He was wild with his grace. He said, there is nothing, there's no expense that I'm going to spare in celebrating. I mean, and you really see the big heart of this dad and the way that he describes it to son number 2. What does he say there? He says, we had to celebrate. We had to celebrate. I couldn't hold it back. Because what was lost is now found. And it's really in that conversation with son number 2 that we see the big heart of this dad, maybe even bursting out of his chest more than it was when he was running down the path. It's interesting when you really dissect the conversation between son number 2, or the older brother, and the dad. You know, honestly, it was the older brother that half of the original audience was Jesus' plan for them to identify with. We didn't see it in our reading because it's the third of 3 readings, third of 3 stories about something being lost. If you go back to the beginning of chapter 15, you will see the setup. Who's Jesus talking to? And there's 2 groups of people. There's what we call tax collectors and sinners. They would really identify with son number 1. All right? There he is. God's going to have open arms for me. But then there's a second group, what we call Pharisees and tax collectors. And they make a comment that really is the catalyst for Jesus to give these little stories. They said, oh, there's Jesus. Look at him. He welcomes sinners, and he eats with them. And so Jesus breaks into some stories. And now it feels like I've been talking about the Pharisees the last couple of weeks here. If you don't know who Pharisees are, Pharisees were the good people. They were the religious people, but they did not like Jesus. They were always confronting Jesus, always trying to cut him down, trying to cast doubt on his character, trying to cast doubt on his message. And you would think Jesus would finally have enough with them. He says, I'm done with you guys. I am just done with your attitudes. I am done with your unforgiving spirits, your unforgiving heart. I am done with your stony hearts. You're so judgmental. Forget it. But he doesn't. He keeps reaching out to them as well. He's patient with them. And you can really see that in the conversation between the father and older son, or son number 2. What does he say? So his father went out and pleaded with him. That word pleading has a repetitive action to it, that it wasn't just, hey, come on in. No, come on, son. Come on. Just come on in. I want you at the party too. I want you to celebrate. I mean, you think about what kind of a dad would do this. I mean, think about this. He's enjoying a big party. And it's your son that you're celebrating. If it's your daughter's wedding and you're celebrating and someone's pouting outside, are you going to go out to the parking lot and talk to them? Probably not. But here's the Father, and you think about that. Where should God be when we're saying, you know what, I don't think it's fair that person's forgiven, or I can't, I just don't like those people. They should get what's coming to them. Where should God be? He should be a million miles away from us, partying with the angels, because another sinner repents. I mean, isn't that a neat picture that the Bible says that the angels break into a party every time the sinner repents? I imagine just like a bell being rung. It's like, ding, all right, everybody, let's celebrate. But the Father, where does he come? God's right here today. And he's pleading with us. Come, I want you to celebrate. Don't be so mad that your brother did all that stuff. Celebrate that he's back. And then what's so amazing is that the son gives this awful excuse of why he doesn't want to celebrate. It really doesn't make sense. Because he says, what does he say? He says, you know what, Dad, I slaved for you all the time, and yet you never give me anything for not even a goat for my friend. Dad had just given him 2/3 of the estate. Think about that. They split the estate. Older son always gets double half, double portion. So younger son only got 1/3. He got 2/3. Dad, you never give me anything. And yet what does the Father do? He doesn't dig in his heels and say, son, you're being an idiot. Look at everything I've given you. No, he lets him talk. He lets him get it all out. And then he just gives them these assuring words. My son, you're always with me. And everything I have is yours. No tongue lashing. No reprimand. No anger. Just this patient heart. And so come and celebrate. I want you there. Everything is yours. If you haven't connected the dots yet, this Father is your Father. Your Father in heaven, who welcomes you back. If you're the wild, reckless living one or was in the past, this is your Father who has his arms open for you. If you're the stodgy one who says, I've done everything right, why do they get a free pass? This is your Father who assures you he wants you to celebrate too. And not to pout. And not to scowl. Just because someone else temporarily squandered that grace. And this is a Father that you know because of the third son in the story. The one telling it. Jesus' job, his whole life, was to make his Father known to you and to me. And so what did he do? If we lived a life that was maybe not God-pleasing, and if we're living a life that is not God-pleasing, Jesus is the one who crushed that sin on the cross so that you can see the open arms of your Father today. If you're the one who's being slow to forgive, Jesus crushed that sin too so that you can see everything that he has is yours. Jesus crushes any despair that you might have today so that you can be assured that this Father, our Father, is the one who shows you a heart of grace and doesn't hold anything back. One of my favorite pictures to depict that is this one by an artist by the name of Ron DiCiani. And there's tons of symbolism in that picture. I gave you a little blurb in your bulletin today that tells all the symbolism of the things in that picture. But the neatest thing that talks about how what brings us into a relationship with our Father isn't so maybe visible, but it's there in the shadows. cross. The cross of Jesus is what motivates us to forgive sinners and to celebrate that they're forgiven. And the cross is what assures us that we are forgiven and that we are welcomed sinners. The cross is what assures us today that our God would spare no expense when it comes to showing us how big his heart is and how big his forgiveness is. And so I don't care who you identify with. The truth is we probably identify with every character in that story somewhere in our life. But you have a God whose heart is so big that he identifies with you. And so that, brothers and sisters, that is something worth celebrating. Amen. We'll join our hearts and voices. We every Sunday we use a statement